Welcome all for today's class. So we continue with our epidemiology session, and today's topic for the discussion is study designs. Out of 4 study designs, today we are going to discuss 2 study designs, that is the cohort study and the cross-sectional study. Both the study designs are important. Actually, all 4, that is the case control as well as clinical trials, and these two. All 4 are important from examination point of view. Always there will be questions on the study designs. Okay, so basically what is the classification of the studies, how the studies are divided? There are basically studies are divided into 2 groups. One is the observational group and second is the experimental group. Now what do you mean by experimental group? Okay, in experimental group, what happens, the principal investigator or researcher, he assigns the intervention to the study population. Okay, that means example is a randomized control trial. So the it is the assignment of drug A, drug B. Okay, so that is decided. There is an intervention which is decided by the researcher. It may be blinded or whatever it is, but it is decided by the researcher. But what happens in the observational study, there is intervention is not given or not assigned by the researcher. It happens in the natural course of the disease. Okay, it happens as it is. Okay, so basically the researcher is just observing. Okay, he is not assigning the intervention, while in experimental the researcher will assign the intervention. Okay, and these observational studies are further divided into 2: descriptive and analytical. In descriptive we have the case series, and in analytical, now analytical means you have some other group to compare. Okay, so in analytical you will have other comparison group, so in which mainly we have cohort study, cross-sectional study, and the case control study. Okay, so out of which we will be seeing the cohort and the cross-sectional. Okay, so basically we are going to learn today observational analytical study, in which cohort study and the cross-sectional study will go into the detail. Okay, so what is cohort study? A cohort study is an observational analytical study in which group of disease-free individuals is classified according to the exposure status and followed over a period of time to observe the occurrence of the new disease. Okay, each and every word is very important. It is an observational analytical study that we have already mentioned. It is an observational analytical study in which group of disease-free individuals, okay, who is followed disease-free individuals, is classified according to the exposure status and followed over a period of time. This is very important because it involves the follow-up. So followed over a period of time to observe the occurrence of the new disease. Okay, so the key concept here is there is an exposure, then there is a follow-up to till there is a development of the disease. So unlike case control studies, the cohort study begins with the exposure status. So in case control study, the outcome has already happened, while in cohort study, the outcome happens later on. We begin with the exposure. Okay, so and in case control, the outcome has already happened. So why it is called as cohort study? The word cohort originates from a Roman military unit that moved together over time. Okay, similarly in research, a group of people is followed through the time to observe the outcomes. Okay, that is why it is called as cohort study. So the definition from the examination point of view, you should remember cohort study begins with the exposure and follows disease-free individuals, okay, forward in time to measure the incidence of the disease. Okay, so it begins with the exposure, follows disease-free individuals forward in time to measure incidence of the disease. So what exactly the flow of the cohort study is? So you have the disease-free population. Okay, then you assess the population for the exposure, and then you will find that certain group is exposed, and you will find that the certain group is unexposed to the high risk factor. So you follow them up over a period of time for the development of the disease. Okay, so once there is a development of the disease, then you compare the incidence in this group, age group, and you compare the incidence in this age group, and you calculate the relative risk. Okay, relative risk is also called as risk ratio. Okay, so most important characteristics about this cohort study, that it starts with the exposure. Okay, there is no outcome at the beginning. It starts with the exposure. Exposure is identified first. Example, smoking versus non-smoking. Okay, so smoking is going to be an exposure. Okay, so we begin with the disease-free population. So everyone must be disease-free at the baseline. Why we need disease-free population? Because the incidence measures the new cases. Here, the cohort study will give you the incidence. So for calculating the incidence, you require new cases. Then follow-up is required. Participants are followed up over a period of time. This allows the new disease to develop. And what this cohort measures is it measures the incidence. So cohort study will calculate the incidence proportion and the incidence rate. So there are two things in the incidence. You get incidence proportion and the incidence rate. Okay. So it can also calculate the risk ratio. Okay, that is the relative risk. Okay, it can calculate the risk ratio. So you get an incidence as well as relative risk. These are the two things which you get in the cohort study. So there is a mnemonic to remember for cohort. So here this C is a classify by exposure. O is observed over a period of time. H is healthy at the baseline. O is outcome develops later. Okay. R is the risk ratio is calculated and time is required. Okay. So basically in cohort, you get incidence as well as the risk ratio. Okay. So this will just help you to remember the things. But remember, you begin with the exposure here and disease-free individuals, and you look for the outcome. You get the incidence and you get the relative risk. These are the things which you. So if you see the stepwise approach, you have a target population. The target population may have some disease or non-disease, but your concentration is only in the non-diseased. Okay, so you will begin with only disease-free individuals. Okay, so you will select this as a sample. Non-disease is your sample. Only those at risk will be included. Then assess them for the exposure as a exposed and unexposed. Okay, then you follow the participants for days, months, years, depending upon the disease, and you will measure the incidence of the disease as the new cases appear. Okay, and then you will compare the incidence and you will calculate the relative risk. So this is what is the 2 by table at the beginning. Generally, we do not formulate the 2 by 2 table at the beginning, because at the beginning there is always a disease free individual. So this column is always 0, 0. This is just for the explanation purpose that this 2 by 2 table is shown to make it clear that this column will always be 0 at the beginning. Okay, so disease individuals will not be there in the exposed as well as unexposed group. Okay, and you will have the non-disease population only. Okay, so here total population of 10 is taken. Okay, 4 and 6, that is the total population. Okay, so important observation is that there is no disease present initially. So D plus column will be empty and everyone will be at risk. Okay, so over a period of time, what happens after the follow-up? There is an exposed and unexposed group, and few will develop the disease in both the groups. Okay, so out of 4 people, 3 have developed the disease, 1 did not develop in the exposed group. Out of 6 unexposed, 2 have developed the disease in this group and 4 did not develop. Okay, so this is the total 10 population, and 3 developed in the exposed group, 2 develop in the unexposed group out of 6, and here 3 out of 4. Okay, so that is what has happened, and this is the total disease. This is the total healthy population or non-disease population. So this is actually going to be the 2 by 2 table at the end of the study. Okay, so when epidemiology discusses 2 by 2 table in a course, that usually means it is the final table. Okay, so because disease outcomes have occurred at this time. Okay, so what you get in the cohort study, you get a incidence. So how do you calculate the incidence? These are the new cases divided by population at risk. Okay, new cases divided by the population at risk. So new cases here will be 3 and here it will be 2. Okay, so these 3 divided by population at risk was 4. This 2 divided by population at risk was 6. Okay, so 3 by 4, that is 75% incidence in the exposed group, and 2 by 6, that will come as 33% will be in the unexposed group. Okay, so that will be the incidence. Okay, so exposed 3 and unexposed 1, total was 4. So 3 out of 4, 75% will develop the disease, while in unexposed group 2 out of 4, that is total will be 6. So 2 out of 6, that will be 33.3% will develop the disease. Okay, so that is how you calculate the incidence among exposed and the incidence among unexposed. Okay, then what you calculate? You calculate the risk ratio, also called as relative risk. It compares the risk in the exposed versus unexposed. So relative risk will be incidence in exposed divided by incidence in unexposed. Okay, so exposed incidence will be A upon A plus B divided by C upon C plus D. Okay, so the relative risk and odds ratio, there is a difference because odds ratio just compares A upon B, okay, and C upon D. Okay, and then you get a AD into BC as a formula, AD upon BC as a formula. But here, when you calculate relative risk, you have to take the population at risk. Okay, so A upon A plus B and C upon C plus D is the relative risk formula. Okay, so incidence, what we calculated in the exposed group was 75%. Incidence in the unexposed group was 33%. Okay, so relative risk will be 70.75 divided by 0.33. So it will be 2.27. So how do you interpret relative risk or the risk ratio? The risk of the disease was RR times as high in the exposed compared to the unexposed. Okay, so the risk of the disease was 2.27 times as high in the exposed compared with the unexposed. So this is what is the interpretation of the relative risk. So we will say the risk of hypertension was 2.27 times as high in smokers compared with non-smokers over a period of 10 years. You always mention the time period also. Time element is there in the cohort. Okay. So RR value, what is the meaning of RR? So RR equal to 1, that means there is no association. RR more than 1, relative risk more than 1 is a harmful exposure. Relative risk less than 1 is a protective exposure. Okay, so this is the thing which you should remember. 1 means no association, 2 means twice the risk, 3 means 3 times the risk, 0.5 means half the risk, and 0.25 is a 1/4 risk. Okay, so null value for RR is 1. Why it is 1? Because RR equal to 1 means incidence in the exposed is same as incidence in the unexposed. So there is no association between the exposure and the incidence of the disease. Okay. So another peculiarity of the cohort study is the percentile. Okay, so this is the unit what we use in the cohort study. Okay, so what happens in cohort? We are following up the population, and sometimes all the participants may not be able to complete the study. So sometimes not all the participants are followed for equal duration. Then we use time at risk. Okay, so for example, you have exposed group here, 3 have developed the disease and 1 is healthy. Okay, in the exposed group, and all these 4 are followed over a period of certain time. So one participant for 9 years, another participant for 8 years, maybe another participant for 6.2 years, whatever, and this participant also for 5 years. So total you will calculate for 4, that has come 27.3% year. Same here, these 6 participants are followed over a period of 15.9% year. Okay, because then we sum up the duration of every participant and get the person year. Okay, so you calculate the incidence rate. So formula for the incidence rate is new cases divided by the person time. Okay, so formula for the risk ratio will be incidence rate in the exposed divided by incidence rate in the unexposed. This we have seen the relative risk formula. Okay, and this is the incidence rate. Okay, your new cases divided by the person time, or if the follow-up is equal, it will be per unit time. Okay, so because then time will be same for all the participants if all have completed. If all have not completed the follow-up, then you go for person time. So what is the interpretation of rate ratio? So it is a 2.9. Okay, rate ratio, that is the incidence rate is 2.9. The rate of hypertension was 2.9 times as high in smokers compared with the non-smoker. That is what you are going to say. So there is a difference between the risk ratio and the incidence rate or the rate ratio. Okay, so risk ratio is nothing but the relative risk. So it is the incidence proportion. Okay, incidence among exposed divided by incidence among unexposed. Here rate ratio or the incidence rate is the actually incidence rate what you have got. Denominator is the people in the risk ratio. Here denominator is the percentile. Okay. Requires follow-up. Yes, risk ratio will require the follow-up. Rate ratio will not require a follow-up. Okay. Then abbreviation is RR for both. Okay. So advantages of the cohort study. It directly measures incidence. It can calculate the relative risk, also called as the risk ratio, establishes temporal relationship, can study multiple outcomes, and good for rare exposure. This you remember. Okay. It is cohort study is good for the rare exposure. Very frequently asked concept in the SBA in MRCOG. Cohort studies are better when the exposure is rare. Okay, so they will give you either in the stem or in the answer. Okay, as a rare exposure. So if you get the rare exposure, select the cohort study. And what it will give? It will give you incidence. It will give you relative risk. It will also tell us the temporal relationship. Okay, and it can also give the multiple outcomes. These are all advantages of the cohort study. Okay. Then what are the disadvantages of the cohort study? Generally, it is expensive, time consuming. There will be loss to follow up. Not ideal for rare diseases. Okay, it is ideal for rare exposure, but not ideal for the rare disease because the follow up will be long. Okay, and large sample often required. Okay, so if you compare the cohort study with the case control study, cohort study start with the exposure, while case control will have the disease population to begin with. Okay, so here the outcome has already happened in the case control study, while in cohort there is no outcome, only exposure is there. Follow-up is required in the cohort. It is not required in the case control. It measures cohort will measure the incidence. It will also give the relative risk. Okay, both will be calculated by the cohort. Case control will not give you the incidence, will not give you the relative risk. Then cohort may calculate the odds ratio, but odds ratio is main feature of the case control. Okay, and cohort is good for rare exposure, while it is not good for the rare disease. Case control is good for the rare outcome. Okay, but not for the rare exposure. Okay, so that is what is the main difference. These two you have to remember because these are the most frequently asked concepts. Rare exposure, cohort. Rare disease, case control. Okay. Then there is something called as retrospective cohort. Okay, so there is a prospective cohort also. There is a retrospective cohort also. Prospective cohort, what we have discussed, it there is an exposure. And this exposure is measured now. The patients or the participants are followed up in future. So it runs from present to the future. So following smokers for next 10 years from now onwards. Okay. While retrospective cohort, both exposure and outcome have already happened. Records are reviewed. The past records are analyzed today. Okay, so using the hospital records from 2015 to 2025. Okay, so here though the both exposure and outcome have happened, still it is a retrospective cohort study, but the analysis is done from 2015 to 2025. Okay, so at the beginning, again, we go into the 2015 only. At the start of the, though we are conducting the study in 2025, we'll go into the 2015, and then you will follow up these patients in a forward direction till 2025. Okay, so that is what is the retrospective cohort study. Okay, so there is a difference between the prospective cohort and the retrospective cohort. So data collection is in the future prospective, while it is from the past records. The cost is higher in the prospective. It will require longer time and there are less chances of bias. While retrospective cohort, low cost, short time, and more biases in the retrospective cohort. Okay, so points to remember as far as cohort is concerned. Cohort study will start with the exposure. Participant must be disease free initially. Follow-up is required. It will measure the incidence. It will calculate the risk ratio, that is the relative risk. Relative risk is equal to incidence among exposed divided by incidence among unexposed. Null value for RR is 1. Okay, null value for RR is 1. So RR more than 1 is a harmful exposure. RR less than 1 is a protective exposure. Best study for rare exposure is the cohort. It is a poor study for rare disease. Okay, Retrospective cohort follows participant into the prospective cohort follows the participants into the future, while retrospective cohort uses existing record. Okay, so that finishes the topic of cohort study. We have few questions, Doctor. Can you please go through the question?
Yes, sir. Question number 1. A study recruits a smoker and non-smoker without hypertension and follows them for 10 years to determine who develops a hypertension. This study design it is A cross-sectional study, B case control study, C cohort study, D ecological study, and E case series. Sir, it is case control study.
Why case control, Doctor?
Sorry, sir. It is cohort study.
We are
Sorry.
following, read everything carefully. Now we have less time. Okay, now we cannot commit such mistakes. Okay, so we have smokers,
Yes,
non-smoker, without hypertension, followed them up for 10 years. No, so time is a component. So
yes, sir.
cohort. Okay,
Yes, sir.
the study starts with exposure smoking and follows disease-free individuals forward in time. This is a cohort study. Next, go ahead.
Question number 2. Which measures can be directly calculated from a cohort study? A prevalence, B odds ratio, C risk ratio, D sensitivity, and E specificity. Sir, cohort study uses the risk ratio.
Correct. Risk ratio.
C.
Okay. So cohort study measures incidence and therefore can calculate the risk ratio. Okay, two things will go hand in hand: incidence and risk ratio or relative risk.
Risk
Next.
ratio. Yes, sir. Question number 3. Which measure is most commonly calculated in cross-sectional study? A relative risk, B risk ratio, C hazard ratio, D odds ratio, and E incidence rate. Sir, D odds ratio.
Odds ratio, but best will be the prevalence because odds is a typical for a case control. Remember, okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So cross-sectional studies use prevalent cases and therefore it can calculate the odds ratios. Next.
Question number 4. Which statement regarding cohort study is true? A. Follow-up is not required. A. Follow-up is not required. B. Disease is present in all participants at the baseline. C. Incidence can be measured. D. Only prevalence can be measured. And E. RR cannot be calculated. So true, it is the incidence can be measured. So answer C.
Yes, yes. Such type of questions you are going to get. Cohort studies begin with the disease-free individuals and follow them up over a period of time, allowing incidence measurement. Next.
Question number 6. In a cohort study, all participants should be A. Disease, B. Exposed, C. Disease free, D. Unexposed, and E. Hospitalized. So it is disease free. C.
Yes, we begin with the disease-free in cohort. Okay, incidence measures new cases. The participant must be disease-free initially. Next.
Question number 7. A null value for risk ratio is A0, B 0.5, C 1, D 2, and E 100. So answer is C 1.
Yes, risk ratio is null value will be 1 for risk ratio. RR1 indicates identical incidence in the exposed and unexposed group. Next.
The null value for odds ratio is A0, B is 0.5, C1, D2, E100. So answer C1.
Correct. Again, same. Okay, or means no association. Next.
Question number 9. A study uses hospital record from the 2015 to determine smoking status and subsequent development of lung cancer by 2025. This is a cross-sectional study, prospective study, retrospective cohort, case control, and RCT. So it is retrospective cohort.
Yes,
C.
retrospective cohort because it begins in the 2015 and it ends in 2025, though the study is conducted in 2025. Okay, so it is a
Yes.
retrospective cohort. Okay, because we have gone retrospectively but collected data prospectively. Okay, from
Yes.
2015 onwards till now. Okay, we are ultimately following them from 2015. Okay. So exposure and outcome have already occurred and are reconstructed from the existing record. Next.
Which study is best for investigating the rare exposure? A cross-sectional, B case control, C cohort, D ecological, and E case series. So answer is C cohort.
Yes, remember. Okay, cohort. This is a very typical question. Cohort studies are particularly useful for rare exposure.